Hi, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. My name is Bethany Servant, and I work in marketing here at UsableNet. We're so glad that you could join us today. The webinar is What's Next in Accessibility, Standards Strategy, and Staying Ahead. And I am actually going to go ahead and hand it off to our first presenter and our host for today, Jason Taylor.
Hey, Bethany, thank you for organizing, and thanks everybody for joining us. Yeah, we've got a great panel here today, and these are colleagues and people that have worked in and around accessibility with myself for many years. So, what I'm hoping here is to essentially MC and bring their expertise to the forefront of these subject matters. And as Bethany said, we've had a number of questions from previous webinars where people have asked us to sort of frame and sort of get them up to speed with regard to what we're seeing in the future as accessibility in some key areas around standards, around processes, and probably also one that stands out a lot is the role of AI in the area of digital accessibility, and hopefully we'll bring those subject matters to life. Just briefly, what I'm going to do is probably start with seniority. When I say seniority, people have been around at UsableNet for almost like 2 decades. So I'm going to ask Giacomo to introduce himself just as a little context of what his role here at UsableNet and who he interacts with from a client perspective.
Hello, everyone. It's great to see so many of you here today. My name is Giacomo Petri. I've been working at UsableNet on digital accessibility for the past 15 years, and I'm currently the director of Auditors team. Beyond my role at UsableNet, I'm actively involved in several accessibility-related initiatives. In particular, I'm an active participant of various W3C groups, including the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group, responsible for developing the WCAG, so the de facto standard, the Y Area Working Group, the ACT Rules Community Group, as well as several task forces. I'm really excited to discuss and share some insights with you today. Thank you.
Thanks, Giacomo. Moving on to Jeff, if you could just give us, Jeff Adams, if you could give us a quick introduction to yourself. I think you're on the West Coast today, is that right, Jeff?
Yeah, I am based out here on the West Coast. I've been with UsableNet for 14 years now, so just a little behind Giacomo in terms of that. But in my role as Vice President of Accessibility Operations, a couple of the key things that I do is leading our education program. So the education that we put out to clients about all aspects of accessibility. And one of the areas, well, two of the areas that I really kind of specialize in is around accessible content and what it takes to make the actual content of a site accessible. And then also helping organizations really set up sustainable accessibility programs to be able to look at things beyond just an audit or beyond just some user testing and make it something that's just part of their everyday, that they're thinking about it every step of the way. And like Giacomo, I'm also involved in some W3C working groups. In particular, I've recently joined the maturity model working group to really help develop something that can help individual organizations understand kind of how they're doing in terms of accessibility and how mature they are around that. So really looking forward to working more there as well.
Thanks, Jeff. Skipping back over to the East Coast, the final one is Joseph De Niro. Is probably the busiest person I know. So, Joseph, maybe you could just give us a quick summary of a couple of the roles that you have. I know you have one here and also one at Helen Keller.
I am Joseph De Niro. I am the Assistant Program Director of Assistive Technology Services and the Director of Business Outreach with Helen Keller Services for the Blind. So in that role, I oversee some of our national training programs that help teaches blind and visually impaired students to become more independent, whether it's in the workplace, school, or just in their day-to-day lives. I also head up our outreach efforts. We work with vocational rehabilitation agencies to expand these training programs across the country through some of our remote training programs. And I head up, I help develop some of our specialized training programs for teens and working age adults. And when I'm not wearing that hat, I'm the rookie of all the people here. I've been working with UsableNet for 7 years now, and I head up the digital accessibility user testing team, where I do user testing, not only applying my technical skills, but my day-to-day living experience, and help our clients in their efforts to make their websites accessible and usable for people with disabilities.
Thanks, Joe. And I'm always appreciative of Joe's time. He's a very busy person, but I also think it's important that his voice has a significance when we start talking about digital accessibility, considering that pretty much our entire industry is about helping improve Joe's experience of digital experiences. Joe, if you're happy, could you share maybe just a little bit about your journey so far in this sort of in this space?
Yep. So prior to me working in the accessibility and assistive technology field, I worked in the hotel industry for about 10 years, and I was diagnosed about 30 years ago with retinitis pigmentosa, which is a degenerative retinal disease, and was told that I would be blind by the age of 50. So it didn't affect me initially, but about 25 years ago, I had to start using a white cane to get around at night. I started using assistive technology in 2005 when I returned back to school for computer science. So I started to learn how to use Zoom text. And then probably about 10 years ago, I migrated over to using a screen reader full time. So I've been using JAWS and NVDA and VoiceOver, pretty much every, TalkBack, pretty much every screen reader since over the last 10 years.
Thanks, Joe. So Joe brings his own personal experience to the table, but also, as you heard, he works with people who have recently become blind or needing some type of visual assistance through Helen Keller's educational system. And I think it's probably eye-opening, especially to a lot of our clients and people who are not familiar with this space, that the vast majority of people who require to use screen readers were not born blind. It's actually seldom that people are now born blind in the Western world. They become blind through other types of situations, whether that's through a disease or through some type of accident. So I think it's important to bring that context in and allow people to understand that this is, the need for accessibility can come at any time in people's lives, and that's why it's important that we are prepared to make sure we're supporting people who need these assistive technologies. Quick agenda. I'm going to start with like sort of the future of like standards. So thankfully Giacomo's here, and also Jeff, who spent a lot of time supporting the sort of general community world with regard to standards. I'm going to talk a little bit about AI's role. I want to get Joe's voice. How has AI, changed his relationship with the digital space today? And then leveraging a little bit more probably on the Jeff side around sustainable accessibility, his experience of what he's seen work at clients and organizations. And then also maybe go back to Joe and get his feeling of like, what are the disability community talking about next? What do they feel are the most urgent areas with regard to accessibility in the digital world for them? Just a quick note, just so you appreciate. I'm actually traveling in Europe. I'm not in a great personal setup. I've got a 3-year-old running around and a dog. So if you do hear stuff in the background, that's essentially just me dealing with my European time zone. But Giacomo is actually based in Italy. Half of our company is based in Europe. The EU Act has significantly changed the perspective of the role of Europe and how it's going to affect digital accessibility globally. And we'll talk about some of that as well, interchanging with these particular areas. maybe I can start first going into sort of standards and lean on you, Giacomo. You mentioned that you're on a number of these sort of important initiatives with inside the W3C and specifically around WCAG. We know that that is the governing, that is the most valuable resource for companies like ourselves and our clients in terms of understanding what they should be doing and giving them a way to measure whether they're doing enough and what they're doing if they're doing it right. What are you seeing as what will be coming in the next couple of years? How are you seeing some of the things that is being shaped in those groups today?
Yeah, I believe it's important to distinguish between the near future and the long-term future. So far, many people from different companies have asked me and expressed concerns about when the WCAG 3.0 will be legally adopted, since they have heard about it. First of all, I'd like to mention that the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group is not responsible for enforcing compliance. That responsibility lies with regulators, policymakers, and other authorities. The role of Accessibility Guidelines Working Group is to provide guidance to define requirements that make websites and web content accessible to as many users as possible. And I'd also like to reassure you that for now, regulation for the WCAG 3.0 is not expected anytime soon, as the standard is still in its early stages. So while the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group continues to welcome feedback, there is no immediate cause for concerns or to rush for WCAG 3.0. They are not ready. They are far from being ready. I also want to reiterate, as I often do with our customers, that the work that the companies are currently doing to conform with the WCAG 2.2 standard will put them in a strong position for the upcoming standards. I've noted down a short extract from WCAG 3.0 that I'll read you now. Just 1 second. Content that conforms to WCAG 2.2 levels A and AA is expected to meet most of the minimum conformance level of this new standard. However, since WCAG 3.0 includes additional tests and different scoring mechanics, additional work will be needed to reach full conformance. So, if you are already meeting the WCAG 2.2 AA requirements, the bulk of the work has been already accomplished. Even though, of course, we definitely know that in the future we will need to do something else to conform to the new standards, since a lot of effort is being invested, for example, in addressing gaps. For example, better meeting the needs of people with cognitive disabilities. We know that right now the WCAG 2.2 level AA is not covering so well the cognitive disabilities. Or, for example, bringing more clarity on some of the ambiguities that are available right now in the WCAG. Related to the gaps in the current WCAG specifications, I'm also involved in one of the task forces, which is named WCAG 2.x Backlog Task Force. And one of the roles is to keep the guidelines up to date. So the material, both the normative and informative areas, they must be kept up to date. And everything that is not possible to resolve within the current guideline will be marked and addressed in this new WCAG 3.0 version. But at this stage, there are no plans to release another version of the WCAG 2.x. So we are not expecting a WCAG 2.3, for example, and the next major updates are expected to come with the WCAG 3.0. So this was for the long term, but for the near future, but also right now, because the ADA and the European Accessibility Act are in place, when it comes to websites and native applications, we can follow the latest version of the WCAG, so the 2.2 AA level. I'd like to mention that neither the European Accessibility Act nor the Americans with Disability Act mention directly the WCAG. The European Accessibility Act refers to the EN 301549, which is mentioning and is matching basically the WCAG 2.1 AA, so not the 2.2 AA, but there is already a draft that is trying to cover the gap, basically. While the ADA is not mentioning a specific standard, since it's a broad civil rights law prohibiting discrimination against people with disabilities. Anyway, also for the ADA, the WCAG are the de facto standard. So my recommendation is to meet and follow the WCAG 2.2 AA because they are backward compatible. So once also the European Accessibility Act will move to the 2.2 version, you are already meeting the requirement. Just a last note for completeness, and then I'll hand over the floor to Jason. I'd like to mention that the European Accessibility Act goes beyond the WCAG because it covers not only websites and applications, but also software real-time communications that together with websites and applications are called as services, but also what fall under the definition of products, such as computers, softwares, ATMs, kiosks, and so on.
Thank you, Giacomo. Yeah, the way that I try to get people to think about the EU Act is it's a lot more like Section 508, if people are unfamiliar with Section 508, which is a federal standard around making sure that everything you buy that's technical essentially is accessible. The EU really is trying to do the same thing that Section 508 did, but actually broaden the umbrella of who is responsible or which digital products is in there. So unlike the American Section 508, where it's around spending federal dollars, the EU Act is more broad around if you provide services in any way or if you sell a technical product to governments, you have to follow these rules. So EU is very much like Section 508, but has a broader catchment base. Would that be fair to say, Giacomo?
No, that's perfect. I mean, yeah.
And just to reiterate, 2.2 AA, that is a great level to aim for because it's going to get you in a good place and you're not going to waste any of your time in the future when the guidelines change. So, moving to the second topic. The second topic is really now talking about AI and how that's affecting digital accessibility. And I want to start with actually Joe, because I think it's the most important thing is how is AI affecting Joe's world? So Joseph De Niro, who is blind and uses a screen reader, and I'm not, but also he knows lots of people in this community. How's AI already affecting in a positive way or a negative way your experience with regard to the digital world? And when I say digital world, Joe, I do mean broadly. I mean what you do on your phone, what you do on your computer, what you do in a day-to-day business. I'm not just talking about websites, Joe, and I know you know that. So I just want to bring that context to the audience. So how is it affecting? How are you using AI today to do stuff that you couldn't do before, or speed up what you used to do before?
Over the last probably 2 years, it's the advances in AI has been absolutely incredible, not just for myself, but the visually impaired community. 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, Be My AI was released, where I have the ability to use my phone and just hold it up to anything that I want to take a picture of. So if I want to hold up my phone to a product in the house to identify it, it will take a snapshot and give me a very detailed description of that. So I can use that. I use that constantly. I don't have right now an accessible thermostat in my house, for example. So to manage that, I use that day to day to manage my thermostat settings, for example. Then about a year ago, to sort of build on that, Meta released their Meta Ray-Ban sunglasses. And it does sort of the same thing where I can ask the AI to describe what I'm looking at, and it will take a snapshot of my environment and be able to describe, that to me. And what the power of that is the hands-free piece of it. So now I can um, walk down the street and be able to look up at a sign on the street and ask the AI to identify that. And if I'm, looking for a specific store, for example, I can locate that by just leveraging those sunglasses and be able to, um, do it hands free. I mean, I've organized like just simple day to day things in my household. Sorting laundry, hold up a T-shirt, describe that T-shirt to me. So it'll describe what the artwork is on the T-shirt, so I know, where that's, what I'm holding up in my hand, and be able to deal with laundry or clothing and stuff like that. The other thing that I utilize, which is based on the Microsoft Soundscape platform, is an app called Voice Vista, which is navigation AI. And so if I'm going to a client that I've never been to and I'm traveling, there for the first time, I can utilize that. And again, now that I have these meta glasses, I can pipe that through my sunglasses and be able to walk down the street and be given, not only turn by turn directions, but kind of given nearby stores or things like that, or near my landmarks, to provide more feedback to me. And when you start pairing those things up, I mean, like Meta has translation, so you can have a conversation with someone in another language, and the glasses will translate for you. So the possibilities is, I can go on a plane and I can go to Italy, and I can meet Giacomo at a cafe there, and be able to use my navigation app, identify the place that I'm going, and I can practice my Italian.
Yeah, this is Joe.
Uh,
This is Joe making a pitch for a business travel trip right now. I can tell.
you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah. And the other thing, Joe, I wanted to ask is like I know you use ChatGTP, right? Can you talk about that in terms of, or whether you're using ChatGTP or whether you use, for example, the AI summary more on the Google result than now looking at Google results? Do you look for AI assistants like customer support AI chatbots? Is that stuff that you're looking for now when you're using the web? Like
well,
how has that changed?
Well, the chatbots would be sort of the bad side of that sometimes, because a lot of those chatbots are not necessarily always keyboard accessible, which becomes problematic. Do I look for them? Not necessarily, but I do. So I'll use ChatGPT or Gemini a lot of times when I'm in meetings and I'm taking notes. It's a good way to, I'm jotting notes down in a document, and it's a great way for me to organize, what I've put down into something that's more meaningful to me. So I use it as a tool sometimes to do a little research, and sort of make that process more efficient, so that I can kind of target the things that I'm looking for. So it that works well for me, and it's a good tool for those things for me.
Have you found that you've tried to use AI to like complete tasks that you would normally just use a website for? I'm thinking things like banking or shopping or stuff. Is it has that? Have you tried that? Is there I'm really looking at the world of in like, well, how important is web accessibility to you anymore if you've got an AI assistant, right? For example. But my gut feel is that you're probably still using your banking website or your banking app and your shopping app. But I just wanted to clarify that from a use.
I'm not using AI for those tasks. I mean, again, when the accessibility of the website is really good, I don't need to. That actually probably would slow me down, because I don't know if that really would improve things for me, at least at this point in the game.
Yeah, and it's an important question I got for you because, we read a lot, especially like people who are, 100% in on AI have sort of like indicated that, well, there will be no websites, right? And actually, why do web accessibility when actually Joe's now going to have an AI agent that's going to do everything for him? And I want people to understand that that's not practical. That's not real right now. If Joe wants to go online and look after his finances, he needs a website or an app that basically allows him to do what we can all do with our finances. If Joe wants to go manage his healthcare, he needs a website that we have access to manage our healthcare. And I think that's sort of an important segue into, well, if we do still need websites, maybe we'll put over to Jeff, like how's AI being used at a client world to potentially make those original websites and apps more accessible from the start, as opposed to hoping for something to happen later on? What do you see in Jeff at the client side in terms of the use of AI in web development in particular?
There's a few organizations that I know who are really trying to integrate uh, the development aspects of these various models. I mean, every time a new model comes out, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, they all, put out their latest coding benchmarks, and they seem to get better and better all the time. But I think where organizations are struggling a little bit is what are the practical uses of the AI in their environment, and what exactly can it do? I think we see articles a lot about the things where AI coding goes wrong, because you really need an expert human in the loop. So if you're an expert developer who has, years of experience, you can use AI as your, junior intern assistant to maybe code up some new code, or help you to debug, or help you to do maintenance. But at the end of the day, you still have to review that code. You have to test it, appropriately before you commit it into your code repository. And I think there's a lot of fits and starts out there in terms of what can work and be sustainable and speed things up versus, either putting bad code out, which I think we read a lot about. Somebody thinks it's good and then it's really not, and they have to roll back. So I think there's still a lot of learning left to do, and I think the AI still has a long way to come. It's a popular thing to say, this is the worst that it will ever be. And that's true because it's always just going to get better and better and better. If you think about the accessibility side of things, it's similar. Like, how good is AI at generating accessible code? And it's a very mixed bag. Like anything else, it can hallucinate and it can be wrong. So if you're an expert developer, who understands accessibility, how to read the code correctly, how to test the code, sure, it may help you speed up. It may help you make things better. But right now, it's really not the silver bullet that I think everybody wants it to be. And again, that's true for accessibility, but true for developing in general, I think, right now as well. Jason, I do want to come back over to you on this because you've been talking on LinkedIn recently, some experiments you did with coding something and trying to get it to turn out accessible code, and it didn't necessarily work well.
Well, yeah, I did some experiments with. I mean, Lovable is a platform that's got a lot of traction right now in terms of a lot of buzz, right? So Lovable is basically a place where you can build quick, easy to build websites, essentially content websites. Essentially, I describe it as an AI, an AI only version of something like Wix or Squarespace or one of these sort of like um, uh, quick to build, quick to experience type web builders. If you give that AI instruction that you want it to be WCAG, it will do its best. But then if you ask it to test itself, it will find problems. So it already knows that it doesn't really produce the best amount of code. The main problem there is that especially at an enterprise level, that most of these systems are sort of built to be very sticky. And what I mean by that is that they're built to make sure that you don't transition away from their platforms. So, you've got an AI code base which is being added to by AI. It's not necessarily doing it the normal developer sort of cleanup and maintenance. It's just sort of add in as you go. And essentially, inherently, they're okay with the fact that that's very hard to transition to somebody else. And I think the real world of coding, especially at the enterprise, is that many people are producing codes. There's components coming from different places that needs to be compiled, that needs to be managed, and it's not reflective. That's not to say that Lovable doesn't have a part to play. There's millions and millions of websites launched every week. So essentially, the problem being is that most likely today, an AI generated website will have generally the same problems as any other website because it's learning its coding from the mass of websites are out there. So most likely it's not the best experience. But I like what you're saying there, Jeff, which is inserting AI to make a good team faster, essentially, I think is what you're seeing today at the client side, right? And also a good web accessibility team faster. AI sort of helping that team remember, don't forget, maintain. But actually, it leads me on to asking Giacomo, what is he seeing in the sort of testing and verifying space? Because I know you do a lot of work with our auditing teams and our clients' testing teams. Giacomo, I wanted to get your feel of like where you say AI having some specific value to speed up some of that work and what you're seeing be successful on the AI front.
Yeah, it's easy to see why everyone dreams, right, of having AI performing an audit or performing a test. I will say that right now, if we ask AI to conduct a comprehensive test or an audit, the AI will generate a lot of false positives. The AI will treat best practices as violations. So, I mean, it's not ready. But if we ask AI to perform very, very specific tasks, such as, I don't know, we have a page in Spanish, right? And we don't know Spanish. And we want to verify that the language of the parts or the language of the page is accurate and reflects the programmatic language set by the developer. We can ask AI, hey, can you please guide me and tell me if the language is properly programmatically set based on the content of the page? And this is something that the AI is performing very well. AI can help, for example, reducing repetitive checks if it's properly instructed. Another feature might be, for example, removing what AI knows is 100% correct. So, for example, if we have a long list of checks to validate, potentially instead of asking, perform these checks for me, we can ask, hey, from this list, remove everything you're sure is correct and leave what is not. This is another way to improve and speed up the activity, right? However, as also Jeff mentioned, as for generative AI in developing or building code, creating code, AI cannot replace the human judgment. We still need human judgment to validate the majority of the success criteria. And yesterday, curiously, during the accessibility guidelines working group, it's not related to testing, but it's an interesting point in my opinion. We discussed one of the oldest requirements for the WCAG 3.0, which was human captions and human captioning. And it was interesting that at the very beginning, we all know that, automated caption was failing because it was not good enough to provide reliable captioning. But right now, AI is much more better. So we decided to move the human captioning from a requirement to a methodology to meet the requirement. So I mean, also the guidelines are evolving based on the technology. So, yep.
You're muted, Jason.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Jeff, and I wanted to move on to like longer term strategies. Obviously, AI can be part of that, but I feel like maybe some of your learnings or some of your observations around what makes a successful accessibility program. And I wanted to discuss not just an accessibility program where everything is done in-house, but also when you can make decisions about what parts of that accessibility may or may not be done in-house, how you sort of look at different clients with different requirements and different resources, and what do you see as the sort of the general formula for success um, in your experience right now working with so many of our clients?
Yeah, this could be a webinar on its own, but to kind of distill down a little bit what I've looked at across really working with clients on the accessibility program for several years now is it really has to start with executive buy-in. I mean, ideally, if you can get the CEO to say accessibility is important to us, we need to work on this, great. But at least, VP level, so that there's not just these pockets of individuals who are like, accessibility is important. I'm going to be accessible in the design team, or I'm going to be accessible in the dev team. If everybody's not working towards the same thing, then it really falls apart in a lot of ways. And on top of that, I think Jason mentioned a great thing about what does it mean if you're not doing it all internally? So yes, some organizations have a dev team, a design team, a QA team. Their marketing team and their content team are all, working together as one inside of an organization. But so often some part of that might be outsourced. Maybe the design's all happening with an outside firm, or the development's happening with an outside firm. You could be working with UsableNet to make your website accessible through something like the UsableNet Assistive Managed Service Program, which is one piece of it. But you also have to think about your website. You've got apps. You've got, I mean, honestly, this goes beyond that to your email marketing messages, to your social media. So it's still important to look at it holistically across the entire organization and how these things come together, how you make people responsible for these elements and accountable to these elements. And really, one of the big gaps I'm seeing currently is where vendors are concerned. From two aspects. There could be the vendor relationships that you have with a design team or a development team or something like that, and what they give you. Are they giving you accessible materials? And how do you validate they're giving you accessible materials? Because I see way too often instances where the client is told they're getting accessible material, and then they find out later because it's audited or they have a complaint lodged against them that they didn't really get accessible material and they didn't know it. So it's key to have something in place, either internal or external, validation of what you're getting from vendors who are doing some of that work for you. The other vendor aspect that has to be looked at is when you're using a vendor to bring in something to your website. That could be a chatbot, for example, which Joe mentioned earlier, are often not keyboard accessible. It could be a cookie banner. It could be an email pop-up to gather emails. It could be a review widget. Any of these things that you bring into your site, you're responsible for those elements. You have to make sure they're accessible, or your customers are going to have a problem, or, more likely these days, you're going to get a lawsuit, especially if you're operating in the US, or you're going to run afoul of the EAA. So you really have to take each of these things, which is where having the whole program is important, and having that buy-in can be very important as well. And I think there are companies who do this well. I work with an education company who, is under the requirements to meet Title II because they are selling digital products into schools. And we went through a process to do a blueprint for them to understand where they were and where they needed to be to have that sustainable program. And in just presenting that blueprint to them, to their leadership, they very quickly, got into the idea that they needed a center of excellence and they needed to consolidate things and centralize things. And over the last, I think it's been about 18 months now since we did that, they've not only continued the work they were doing, but matured themselves so much. So it is possible to do all these things, but it really has to come from somebody in leadership saying, this is important, we must do this. And today you really can't put that off any longer because there are so many rules and regulations in place that if you don't have it, you're going to end up really scrambling to do something once you've been called out on it.
That's great feedback. And also, I mean, something that I've seen, and I think we're going to put up a little slide here and I'll talk through this slide, but, Jeff and I have, talked about this subject a lot. And he even started at a higher level than this, which is executive buy-in is part of that sort of overall success. But the first thing that we see is, regardless of how you're going to do web accessibility, you've got to assign ownership. And the first most important thing that person could do, rather than go out and start testing your website, is review the contracts that you've got. You've got to help that. You've got to put your dollars to work. So where you're spending money on, whether that's external vendors, as Jess said, external design agencies, accessibility needs to be part of that procurement. It needs to be in the presentation that they give to you. Not only you need it, you want to demand that as part of your dollar spend, but you also, as Jess said, need to write in the contract how they prove that they give it to you. Not just they say they give it to you, because you don't have the time. Big organizations don't have the time to check every single thing that's being given to them from other digital properties or other digital vendors, to make sure it's accessible. So you need a way for them to self-verify what they're providing to you as accessible. And then you've got to decide what's the best way to execute this. We talk about this. You've got internal teams. A lot of companies' websites are built by vendors. Are you putting the responsibility on the vendor? Is it a mixed model where you've got the vendor responsible for certain parts of the website, and you've got internal teams producing content? You need to set out the responsibilities. There's opportunities now to outsource some of that web accessibility, as Jeff said, in terms of UsableNet has a managed service. But again, you still need someone responsible for making sure that these moving parts come together. There's a lot more in the digital space, as Jeff said, than just the website. And then you need to make sure that there's a process in place for testing and prioritizing and monitoring and maintaining. Every month, websites change. It's not the same as an office building and a disabled ramp. The office building never changes. It's there for 20 years. Websites change all the time. So you need to make sure you've got that in place. And then maybe the fourth area that Jeff and I talk about a lot is an accessibility statement of policy. The actual process of creating one is really important, because you typically need to have executive buy-in before you get a policy or you get a statement. So again, that it sort of almost creates a conversation around stakeholders about what are we trying to achieve? How are we going to do it? Is there funding available to achieve it? And these are really important components to talk about. So there's sort of the takeaways in terms of what we see as a successful program. It's owned by somebody. That somebody doesn't have to be the accessibility tester, doesn't have to be in the weeds. They need to understand what's at their disposal. And the first thing is managing contracts, managing the resources that you're already paying for, and making sure you're getting the best out of your dollars when it comes to making sure that what you're getting from vendors is accessible. We're going to close off on basically what's next, what's in the future. And I think most importantly, it's a really question back to Joe De Niro. And what have you seen maybe improve in websites and apps, Joe, over the years? And what are you still struggling with every day, which really should be, fixed by now? What's your feeling in terms of, where this space needs to go? Because I feel like, for 20 years, we've all seen the same challenge for you and other users. What area of the web is the most challenging today? And how, and the most valuable for you if it was opened up from a digital space, and not just you, but also your students that you're working with?
As far as improvements, probably you're seeing less and less issues with alt text with images. I'm seeing less of that, and that's probably due to auto-generated AI. But that's sort of the low-hanging fruit. the real meat on the bones of things that are issues is things like form elements that are not labeled or have interactive issues. Just general being able to interact with elements keyboard is an ongoing issue, and that's a majority of the issues that my students bring to me, and issues that I deal with as well. And those are the big issues that are still out there.
When you talk about interactive elements, you're sort of talking about tasks on website, right? You're talking about, like, maybe you can describe your sort of the types of things that you would typically want to do.
Yeah, so if I'm going to an e-commerce site and I want to expand a sub menu for one of the categories, and hit enter on that expandable element, but it's only that expandable is only available for mouse hover. So I mean, there are things that I can do as a very advanced JAWS user to overcome that, but 90% of JAWS users don't have that tool in their toolbox, or just you want to submit a form and the submit button doesn't interact with the keyboard. Just things like that, where it's trying to interact with different form elements, where you're trying to make a choice in a drop down menu, and you can't interact with the drop down menu. Those sort of things.
So, I mean, I hear this a lot. I mean, we see it when we do testing. I think the most critical user testing errors that we find are essentially unable to complete a task. And that could be a range of issues, but primarily it's around interactive elements that are built to be sophisticated. And unfortunately, the more sophisticated the code is, the more likely potentially they can make it inaccessible. The limitation right now with regard to things like testing, but also testing adding AI, is that it's very hard for those systems to act as if they are Joe, to act as if they are a screen reader, and to verify that those elements are selectable, are in focus, are navigable. So essentially, user testing, as we've always sort of emphasized, is the ultimate way to make sure that something is accessible, verify whether it is or not accessible. But I'd also say that, Joe's team, when they get involved with a client, when they test the site and they have problems, that's the most motivating content that the client has to give to developers. If the developer gets a list of 1,000 issues that are generated off an automatic scan, they don't get very excited or motivated by it. But when they see a video or they get a report from a real user with assistive technology that finds a barrier, that is significantly motivating for that team to go solve that problem. They're typically problem solvers in general. So they want to see the problem, they want to understand the problem, and then want to solve it. So I'd really encourage everybody to have in their accessibility program user tested, however small that is or however big it is. But I think that's really the key to success. I know we're going down to the last 10 minutes and we want to basically take questions. They're a US vendor with lots of European sites, and they want to sort of understand what's the best way to sort of get a grip across their European sites. If sort of would you test with a certain standard? Would you test with a certain set of pages? How would you, first give an organization with a US site and multiple European sites a sort of snapshot of where they are against sort of the EU Accessibility Act? How are we going about that today? How are we driving that?
Yeah, so I think that to answer this question, we need to take a step back. So we need to distinguish, first of all, what is an automated test versus what is a manual audit. An automated test is something that you can run automatically, so it doesn't require human effort. So it's easy, fast, while an audit requires, knowledge, requires a lot of time to be conducted and so on. So when it comes to audit a property, we need to understand which is the goal and which are our needs. If we want to audit a website, we need to define the scope, first of all. So we need to define what is a representative sample, because we cannot simply run a crawler and audit, test, check thousand of nodes. So first of all, we need to define the representative sample. And the representative sample usually replicates the main core flow, for example, of a website, the contact form, the checkout process, and probably also, recurrent templates, components. So when it comes to evaluate a website, which is a multi-language website, we need to think the same thing. Is the multi-language website different depending on the language? So do we have different templates, different pages, or it's always the same, it's just the language that is changing? In the first case, if we have different templates, different pages, definitely we need to define the scope for each language, for each website. But if they share the same source code, the same template, the same components, we don't need to perform a full audit on every single language. We perform the audit on the main language of the website, and then we check specific aspects such as, I don't know, the language of the page, because if the website is in Italian, I would expect to have the lang attribute set to Italian.
What's
Okay.
been your main
You're
experience with
muted, just
e-commerce sites in general? Do you see that there's particular areas which are different in Europe, like the checkout or payment options? Like where would you see mostly the differences?
No, I will say they are very, very similar. Probably there are differences in, the promo areas. So where, the market is different from the US and the Europe. So potentially if you have, I don't know, a collection page, or you have a promo page to engage users from different countries, probably those are the areas where there are more differences. But in general, checkouts, PDPs, PLPs are always the same, regardless the country.
Thank you. Bethany, any other questions you wanted to put into the team?
What examples of practical validation of third-party vendor services have you seen work well? Anything automated or still very manual?
I
Uh,
could pick that one up.
yeah, Jeff, I think that's a
Um,
good one for you.
I think automation can be a great clue on their baseline. If a vendor is allowing automated issues out into their widget, whatever it is, I think that would be a flag to, ask them more questions about what is their accessibility program? What are they doing to help validate it on a manual level? Because of course, automation takes care of a very narrow number of the WCAG success criteria. So it could kind of be like the early indicator of how they're handling accessibility. Because if there are automated things, it means they're not taking care of the things that are some of the most easy to, find and identify. Beyond that, we work with several organizations who will audit their third-party vendors, and audit every single one of them that's on their website, so that they have a complete look at the accessibility, manual and automated, and then go back to the vendor and start to hold them accountable for that. And more recently, we've even had a couple of our organizations that we work with audit things that they're thinking about buying. So they'll actually have us go audit things on some other website where it's deployed to understand just the accessibility of that widget. So they know what they're buying and can confirm, what the vendors are saying about their accessibility.
So since we are at the hour, I'm going to go ahead and close out the webinar. Thanks, everyone.